Welcome back to Where Do We Go From Here with Scott Catello. In this, my third episode in my series, The State of the Office in 2026 Workplace Series. Today, we dovetail a little bit into a interior design perspective. And as such, I have with me today Jennifer Janus, not only president of Pophouse, but a good friend who represents a very talented group. And I'm pleased to say that I've had the pleasure of working with Pophouse on several projects in the Detroit area. But Jennifer, you'll do a much better job talking about yourself. So please tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and Pophouse.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join the podcast today, Scott. It's great to be here. Um, as Scott said, I'm Jennifer Janus. I joined Pophouse about 9 years ago as the COO. Fun fact about my background is I do not have an interior design background. So I went to the University of Michigan and majored in English and Japanese, and then spent many years at the beginning of my career in advertising as a writer. So worked through sort of the creative side of advertising into leadership roles, really figuring out what creative disciplines need to thrive. And so utilized that background and skill set and joined Pophouse as the COO. So when I joined, Pophouse had been in business for about 3 years at the time, was still kind of in a startup mode. And I came in to sort of organize and create structure and process, but also to really hire the team that would create, our mission was a globally recognized design firm. So then after that, moved into the role of president about a year later. So for the last 8 years, I've been focused on creating the growth of Pophouse. And so a little bit about Pophouse. We actually started as a result of Rocket Mortgage moving from the suburbs of Detroit down to downtown Detroit. And at that time, Detroit really was at the beginning stages of the revitalization that it's gone through. And when Rocket Mortgage moved downtown, there was a lot of hesitation to moving and relocating workspace in downtown Detroit. There wasn't the infrastructure that exists today. So in terms of um, restaurants and retail and things like that, it didn't exist. So there needed to be a draw to convince people to move downtown and relocate their work downtown. And so from that standpoint, we began and we started really to create these spaces that were culturally driven, that would get people to want to come into the office, to connect with the company. And so for the first 5 years in business, it was really making sure that the office holistically had what people needed to be safe, comfortable, connected with their company, inspired when they went there. And so that was a catalyst for the start. And we've had the opportunity as an interior design firm to work in a great number of buildings in downtown Detroit and really help with the growth and revitalization of the city.
Excellent. And you guys have done a good job as
Oh,
well.
thank you. Thank you.
Now, to that point, since you've already dovetailed into the subject of workplace, you did say that you listened to my last episode, The State of the Office from Return to Reinvention, which was the first episode in this series. What are your overall thoughts? What say you? Where did I go wrong? And pick apart what I did.
Well, overall, I think great observations. I mean, the whole time I was listening to it, I was just sort of nodding my head saying, yep, that's absolutely right. And I love your concept of reinvention because I think, for from 2020 to 2023, we were stuck in this return to work. What is this going to look like? How is the pandemic carrying forward? And I think we got to a point a couple years ago where we were probably all sort of tired of that conversation, saying, you know what, the pandemic has happened several years ago. It was an amazing catalyst to the future of work, right? I think it opened up possibilities that we never even thought of before. And now I do really agree that we're in this stage of reinvention. So it's much less about people returning to the office, which you made that point, and it's much more about what's the purpose of the office and how is it going to be supportive for people to thrive. And I thought that was a great point. And you stated a data point, which was that utilization rates of well-designed offices were double those of just a regular office floor plate. And I thought that was a fascinating point to bring forward to say the design matters. And I think we are often faced with this idea of how do we talk to clients, potential clients, about the fact that these layers really truly do make a difference in their team. And I would add to it. So it is, and you stated this, the office is this place for culture, reigniting sort of mission of the company, brand. The one thing that I would add to it is its connection. And I think
Mm.
at its very core, um, people need to be connected for businesses to thrive, for well-being, all of those pieces. And so the office is that physical space where people can come to connect, and then all sorts of things start to fall into place. And that's where performance can really get ignited, and innovation can happen, and these different pieces. And I think you and I are both in this state of kind of convincing maybe hesitant companies of the value of this investment. It's a huge investment to update and change real estate, but long term it really truly makes an impact. So that data point that you brought forward, I think helps to sort of create that story of purpose.
Yeah, yeah, good insight. And I think looking back even to my 2023 episode, one of the things that I related to, and you kind of touched on it, is the fact that the office and people coming into the office is really part of an ecosystem or an ecosystem in the area or the city that you happen to be. And so, a couple questions for you regarding that. How do you see, and I'll make it specific to our area, the city of Detroit, how are you seeing that as an ecosystem right now? And given your projects, because we're talking about culture and office redesign, how many of your projects are class A as opposed to B or C?
Hmm. So really, the office is an ecosystem. And when you think about, the city of Detroit as an example, is that there's so many pieces that have to work in tandem to create community. And so the office is one building block. And when you can draw people into the office, then businesses, restaurants, retail, they all have the foot traffic, in downtown Detroit on any given day to thrive. And I think we saw this tremendous momentum, into through 2019, really, where really downtown Detroit was busy. It was like you could
Mhm.
see this momentum. And then the pandemic hit, and I think what's interesting about that is because people weren't coming into the office, you know, the restaurants had to close. And for, several years after, when you're downtown working in the city, it was hard to find a place to eat lunch. And it was that was sort of the light bulb moment for me of the impact that you can make by coming into the office, right? And then you decide, what, I'm going to go out to lunch and that's going to help that business. And then a retail location is going to open. And so when you talk about the ecosystem, it's really the community that's being built. And, some of the projects that we've worked on together, in the Hudson's building and things like that, it's amazing to see the tremendous foot traffic that has happened by building these spaces for people to come to. And it's not just people working, it's people, over the holidays, there were outdoor activations and, lines down the street to take pictures near the Hudson site in front of the giant bear. And, that sense of like, wow, this is really making an impact. You can see it happening, in space. And then I think the second part of your question about class A office versus class B or C, really it's a mix for us, but I think the class A is really where a lot of companies are um, trending towards, right? The opportunity came if there's multiple vacant office spaces, can we upgrade our space? Can we get more amenities so that we can bring people into the office? So I think there is, an emphasis on that, but I think you can also bring those touches, those connection points into other types, class B and C office place, as long as you understand what people want and what's going to draw them into the office. So design still has a role there to make those spaces where people can thrive as well.
Well said, Jennifer. And it couldn't agree more. And you threw out a word, amenity, that we're going to get to in a little bit because
Yeah.
it's top of mind right now to talk to you about. But before we jump to that, you and I had a conversation not too long ago where you brought up the power of partnership concept,
Mhm.
which was very intriguing to me and got my sort of wheels spinning. But now that I have you on the podcast, please explain to the listeners what you were thinking about.
So, as a business, we decided early on that we're a design firm. And so, what that means is we have no architects on our team. And so, very early on, every project we did was in partnership with an architecture firm. And I think what that enabled us to do was see how incredible it is when you can bring multiple teams together to work on a project. And so we took the approach of, instead of building it within the walls of Pophouse, that when we needed the different skill sets, we would partner. And we're going to go really deep into the layers of design. That's our expertise. We want to focus there. And so, what we've seen over many years is the success that happens when you bring people that maybe aren't working together day to day, and you bring them together on a project to solve problems, to create something new. There's this, maybe there's some friction, maybe there's some new ideas that come forth, but it really helps the team at large grow because you've got multiple different perspectives at hand. So we have now looked at that the last couple years as really kind of a secret sauce or something like that, which
Hmm.
is, how do we bring different partnerships together to make the work thrive? And that's what's going to continue pushing and challenging us to be different. And so, an example, we usually do Detroit Month of Design event in September every year. Last year we hosted an event, and we invited what would traditionally be considered some of our competitor companies. We said, come to Pop House. We're going to invite students in, and we're all just going to, our goal is, let's come together to support designers who are just coming out of college, and, help them start their career in design. And initially, some of the response we got was like, wait, why are you inviting us to come? Aren't we competitors? And it was like, but we're all in alignment in this goal of revitalizing the city of Detroit and beyond. And so the better relationships we can have, the better it's going to be for everyone. And so, when we talk about the power of partnerships, it's kind of the idea that more is more, right? If we come together and we work hard, we'll create more opportunities for everyone versus sort of looking at, we're all competing for sort of the same narrow lane of opportunities. So it's been a great opportunity for us, and I see that Detroit may be unique in the fact that we all have a big part for the revitalization of the city, and so we're willing to sort of join arms and all work together for this big common mission.
Yeah. No, well said, Jennifer. I think you and I share that same sort of mentality that our AEC industry is really a community. And,
Mhm.
one of the things, being in the field for a while, this area is really kind of a small town.
Yeah.
and everybody kind of know it. But I think it's important to look at it as a community more so than just a competitive environment.
Mhm.
Yeah. So good for you guys. So getting back to that term, amenity, and it seems that's the word that's coming up all over the place when anybody talks about office these days because employers are trying to get people back into the office. And you've probably seen both sides. You've seen companies do mandates. Some are a little loose in that. But what are you seeing before we get to the amenity part? Where are you seeing CEOs making decisions now, whether it's hybrid mandates or kind of a loose policy?
Yeah. So I was just recently looking at CBRE's, I think it was a study from 2025 that said in office requirements had doubled from 2024. So I think it was up to like
Hmm.
37% or something like that in 2025. And the prediction was that it would continue to increase. And a lot of that was around CEOs creating mandates to say you have to be back in office a certain number of days. And, I think what we've seen is even when those mandates are put in place, people still won't come, or they'll come and they won't stay the whole day. Right. So everyone's trying to be sort of crafty to work around the mandate because the reality is, hopefully, everybody working on your team is an adult and they can make the right decisions for their job and what needs to be done. And like we talked about earlier, this opportunity opened up, 2020 and beyond, which was, oh, I actually can be productive when I'm at home or I'm working somewhere else. So, unless there's a reason to come into the office and I understand that reason, I'm not going to go or I'm not going to stay. I'll go and I'll show my face and then I'll, sneak out when nobody's looking. And
Hmm.
so ultimately, like, that is not, going to be productive or really be the catalyst that that company needs for success. And so I think you and I both agree and talk about this a lot is that you really have to flip it to say, what is going to be so appealing that someone will say, I want to go for that thing? And so it really comes to the amenities that are being offered, but understanding, and there's two levels of understanding the amenities that are important for a specific company or a specific team. What do they care about and what's important? And then the amenities that are at large important to humans and what is going to help them thrive. And so really digging in when we start projects to understand the specific team and then combine that with what we know about the industry, the market, research, data, and then really bringing those two things together. And I think one of the things that we've learned in projects over the last several years is if you ask a team what they need, they have a small, list of things that they think they need. But then when you observe them working in their space or you pull data on things, then you get a whole different set of information as well. And so the sweet spot of what that company may need is taking all of those data points and coming up with that recommendation of what is really going to get people excited and engaged in their company.
Excellent. On that very statement, what what are amenities right now that are getting people back into the office? What are CEOs and company owners, what are they pulling the trigger on to say, yes, Jennifer, that's a great idea. Let's do that. I think it'll help.
Yeah. So I'll give you two examples. So we have recently completed the common spaces in the Hudson's building in Detroit. And that project, it's a new build, really, a community catalyst for growth in the city of Detroit. Really exciting. But one of the conversations that started a few years ago was the change from tenant amenities within the space to common amenities in the building
Hmm.
and the offering of what types of spaces will people need and be excited about within the building. And so there's really a combination of a couple, one being space to step away from the office and potentially run into people from other companies, right? And maybe
Hmm.
have a conversation that you didn't plan on, but it starts a new idea or a new thread of thought. And so creating there's in the Hudson's building, there's a large open atrium area
Yep.
where there's spaces to walk, there's spaces to sit down and have one-on-one, there's biophilia and natural light for wellness, there's a coffee bar. So it's really, how can I step out of my office without going outside and, 0-degree temperatures in the middle of winter and get reinvigorated and energized. So that's one common amenity that I think is really, we're getting a lot of positive feedback on that. We also had the opportunity to build a location within that called the Rec Room, which is
Hmm.
designed to be like a social club. And there's multiple spaces within that. There's some lounge spaces, there's a digital swing suite, so like digital sports environment. So the opportunity to come and have a meeting and play golf or, a number of different sports there. And then our favorite was we put a pickleball court in there.
Mm.
And I was in the building last week, and there's tenants in the building now, and they had stepped away. They were clearly having a meeting. They were in their work clothes, and they were playing pickleball, like in their suits and their heels. And I was like, wow, I didn't envision that it would be like mid meeting, we're going to stop and play pickleball. But what I think it does is it invites play into work, right? It invites this sense of joy and excitement that you can have during your workday, and they can all be sort of seamlessly blending together. So the feedback that we're getting so far is those spaces have been constantly booked by the tenants, and that they're really going to be successful moving forward. And then you and I have had the opportunity to work in partnership on the Rock space in the
Mm.
Hudson's building, and that is a brand new space that they are just moving into. But I think there's a lot of layers of hospitality, and it creates
Yeah.
it's a tailored environment that is very warm and welcoming and meant to be supportive for a number of different types of work styles. So I think you mentioned in your podcast to kick off this year the idea of flexibility, and that space
Yeah.
has just that. There's flexible ways of working throughout the day. There's flexible ways that as that team grows and pivots over time, the space will support doing that without a major renovation, a major construction project. And so, I think same goes for, I'm sure you have, a lot of insights into that space as well in terms of how that is going to be supportive for the team moving forward.
Yeah. No, I totally agree, and I think you hit the high points, so I don't have to. Thank you. And one of the things that if we're going back to that particular space, and something that you and I talk about is, a branding as an influence.
Mhm.
Um, but it also kind of dovetails to culture of a company. And I know you guys do branding yourself, but how do you see that as a direction, the branding alongside of the amenity space to help improve a company's culture?
Mhm. We have really found it to be a crucial finishing layer in the project. So we know that when people come into the office, it's an opportunity to connect with their team, to really engage with the culture. And it doesn't take much engagement with the brand to get reconnected. So it's really those branding elements in the space that almost become like pieces of artwork that reconnect and remind team members, this is the mission of the company that I work for, this is the vision. It keeps everybody sort of moving in the same direction and in alignment. And, I'll use an example of our own Pophouse office space in that, a lot of times I will say on our projects, clients want to leave the branding layers to the very end of the project. And one of the things that we did in our own studio space was to show how thoughtfully you can build it right in with the rest of the design of the space so that you're not even noticing that it's connecting you with the brand, right? The icons, the different shapes, the branding colors, putting those in different, aspects throughout the space that don't hit you with a big core value right in your face, but very subtly sort of remind you this is where you are, this is the team that you work with. You don't need a lot of that. You can still have team members that are working in a hybrid capacity and, remote and not in the office, maybe, 3 days a week. Just those connections from the time that they're coming in there, remind them this is the company that I work for and this is the team that I'm connected to.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, Jennifer, because I think you and I share that same sort of philosophy in that, office design shouldn't be about trends. Your idea of branding really cuts to the chase of trying to find out how a company works, what they're about, and who they want to be. And that's really kind of what it should be, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think, we've had such an opportunity working on these beautiful historic buildings in the city of
Yeah.
Detroit. And so that what you're exactly talking about, I think comes to light in every project, which is it shouldn't be about design trends. There really shouldn't. I don't like really subscribe to design trends. It's more about how do you thoughtfully represent a company in space. And a lot of times that's, paying homage to the history of a building and also looking at the company and how they're going to take that space forward and marrying them together. And I think when you do that thoughtfully, that space can endure for a very long time because it's not about a trend. It's about this space for this company at this time.
Right. And in fitting of my podcast title, Where Do We Go From Here? Jennifer, where do we go from here as far as the office in 2026? And look in your crystal ball and tell me what happens down the road.
Yeah, I really feel like we're at a tipping point. So I think that businesses are starting to realize where we may have gone through a couple years of do we really need an office? Should we get rid of the office? Is it important? I think there's alignment now that being together, collaborating, having a space to do that is important, which I think is a great, step in the right direction. And now, like you said about reinvention, I think we're at this point of okay, so if we all agree the office is important, now how do we position it to be successful for the company moving forward? I do believe that this sort of the mandate phase is probably ending and
Hmm.
now businesses are going to say we have to invest and how do we thoughtfully invest? And so that is, as we know, a lot of companies have reduced their square footage. They're being a lot more thoughtful and intentional about how they're using the space. And that feels like the right direction. Then next, I think it's hard to predict or look into the crystal ball and say, what does the future hold? So as, companies that are responsible for recommending how the environment gets built out, I think the most responsible way we can approach it is the flexibility piece. So understanding what components are difficult to change and making thoughtful decisions around those. And then looking at things that are less costly to update or revise over time. And maybe, making those things a little bit more, you know, shorter term decisions, but having all of the infrastructure flexible and easy to change so the company investment is one that's going to endure for the long term.
Okay, that all makes sense to me. And specific to our area, I know like companies, Ford, Stellantis, I think GM, they're bringing people back. In some ways 5 days a week. Do you think in our little sandbox in Detroit that changes anything for other companies?
That's an interesting question. I think that, even historically, when the larger companies make a decision, I think a lot of companies follow suit. They feel like, okay, if there's a 5 day a week mandate, now we have, the onus to do that as well. We can make that mandate. Um, I don't know that that is what is going to be most productive for people long term. I think when you have, a step forward in anything, any sort of new innovation, like, oh, we can work hybrid, we can work remote. I think it's hard to unwind that and go back to the way it was before. So I sort of feel like it's going to hybrid is not going away. It's here to stay. And each individual company has to really determine what their team culture is and what is going to be successful for them long term. And so I do think into the future, there's going to be a lot of variability around that. And it's just going to constantly be shifting and updating, over time instead of what we saw before, which is in general, businesses are in office 5 days a week. I don't think that will ever go back to that again.
Okay. And I think in the first episode of the series, I threw out another data point that I think companies were getting decreasing their square footage by 30 or 35%. Do you still see that as a trend through this year and next year, let's say?
Yeah, we've been seeing that. And I think I think the number one reason people come into office is to collaborate. And
Mhm.
a lot of square footage was taken up in the past by dedicated assigned workstations. And so you'll see a lot of offices that have not yet been updated that are just, a lot of the footprint is taken up by workstations. And so
Yeah,
it's really opening up that square footage and repurposing for the idea of collaboration. I think a lot of companies now are doing the heads down days virtually. So people are working from home or in other spaces on their heads down days, and then they're using their in office days for large group meetings, for one on ones, for those in person connections. And so it's pivoting the space, which is I think a thoughtful thing to do if you can reduce the square footage and then reinvest that into, really making that space a hospitality environment that is
right.
warm and that people are excited to come to when they are in the office.
Excellent. Jennifer, I can't thank you enough, but before we go, we have a speed round of questions, which
Oh
I
boy.
said would be coming up. Now, I'm just gonna ask you, are you ready?
I don't know. I can only
Oh, well,
imagine. What are you going to ask
I
me,
guess
Scott?
we'll find out together.
I guess.
Okay, so there's 4 questions. First one being, what is the first job that you've ever had?
I worked at the Gap in Birmingham, Michigan, in 1992. That was my first job. It was amazing. I loved working retail.
Good for you. All right, second question, if you could instantly master one skill, what would it be?
Cooking. So,
Oh,
fun fact, I do not like to cook. My husband is an excellent cook. This year, I decided I was going to learn how to cook. And I took a knife skills class,
okay,
and it was mind blowing. I have to say, I learned how to cut vegetables. I've been cutting them all wrong my entire life. It's changed my life. I'm so excited that someday I'm going to enjoy cooking. That is my goal.
okay, well, that's certainly a good goal.
Yeah.
So the next question, our mutual friend Tim K had a hard time with. So I'm gonna throw it
Oh
out to
gosh. Oh
you.
no.
What would be the perfect theme song for Jennifer Janus?
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm not going to give you a song,
Okay,
but I'll give you an album if that works.
okay, fair
Okay.
enough.
So little known fact, my family's from Ireland. I'm actually an Irish citizen. And favorite album of all time is Van Morrison and the Chieftains. So you put on any of that music and I'm happy.
You're in the zone at that point.
I'm in the zone. I'm in the zone.
Okay. All right.
Did
And
I do
last
better than
question.
Tim?
Oh, you did much better than Tim.
Okay.
Tim's still getting back to me.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So, last question for you. What favorite app would you hate to admit that you use a lot?
Mm. Well, okay. I I'm going to say Instagram because I'll just be honest, I was very anti social media for a long time. I have two teenage girls, and so I try and keep them away
Oof.
from social media as much as possible. But I was like, well, I need to really engage because of work and design. And, I am truly amazed by how many sort of new things that it brings to you. But recently I've been like, okay, you could see how it sort of takes a hold of you so I'm like, I gotta stop using that. But I do appreciate it.
Okay. Well, Jennifer, it's been a pleasure as expected to have you on the show. Any last words for the listeners?
Uh, no, I mean, Scott, I just really appreciate the dialogue and I appreciate that you are digging into all of these points around the physical environment and office and design. I mean, I think it's a really important topic and one that I think businesses are still challenged with what to do. So if
Yeah,
we collectively can, help and work with people to make these decisions, I think, that feels like we're completing the mission in some sense.
I appreciate that. And thank you again, Jennifer Janus with Pophouse.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, for being a guest on Where Do We Go From Here. I truly enjoyed your insight into the workplace environment, and you added so much to this workplace series. And I urge all listeners to go to pophouse.design and check out the amazing work that Pophouse produces through their very talented group. As always, I appreciate your support for Where Do We Go From Here. And if you're liking the content, please subscribe and tell your friends to do the same, as I'm hoping to grow this podcast through you guys. As a reminder, this podcast can be heard on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, and iHeartRadio, all now in video format. As always, I welcome your feedback and questions on this episode. And if you have ideas for future episodes, I would love to hear them. For any such feedback, feel free to contact me at catelloscott@gmail.com. Now, I'm pivoting a little bit from this workplace series, but don't worry, still have a few workplace episodes in the schedule for this year. However, I'm very excited to say that I'll be releasing the first episode of my new Truth series, starting with the first episode entitled The Cave, Plato, Truth, and the Shadows of Our Time, which takes on one of the most powerful metaphors, in my opinion, in Western philosophy, Plato's allegory of the cave, and asks us all what it means for us today. So definitely check out this first episode of my 4-part series on the subject of truth, releasing next month. Till next time.